Tomorrow, the 11th of September, marks exactly 6 years since the House of Commons last considered whether or not to legalise assisted suicide. That bill, tabled by former MP Rob Marris, was soundly defeated by 330 votes to 118. On a historic day, MP after MP from across the political spectrum took to their feet to slam the bill for its lack of safeguards, the message it sent to the elderly, infirm and disabled, but most of all for its core principle that some lives are worth more than others. It was a resounding rejection of a dangerous proposal, but the campaigners, eager to end the legal protections for some of the most vulnerable in society, have not gone away. One bill is expected to be debated in the House of Lords next month. Another is expected in the near future in Scotland. Well, with me now to help us to a better understanding of these bills and the dangers they pose is the Institute's Head of Research, Dave Greatorex. Dave, thanks for joining me. You're a busy man, so let's get straight into it. The Marris Bill would have allowed patients thought to have less than 6 months to live to obtain drugs to commit suicide. So can you summarise for us what is being sought by campaigners this time round?
Well, if we take the Baroness Meacher bill in the House of Lords first, that's actually virtually identical to the Marris bill, in any practical terms. So again, you're talking about a diagnosis of a terminal illness and the reasonable expectation that the person's got up to 6 months to live. So that's basically the same as the Marris bill. In terms of Scotland, the Lee MacArthur MSP bill, we've not seen that yet. We expect a consultation in the autumn and perhaps the bill in the new year, but we would expect that to be very similar again.
Now, it's probably worth pointing out that none of these bills, so the Marris bill and the new ones, they don't use the term assisted suicide. So they've rebranded it essentially to assisted dying. But it's right, isn't it, that our country has some of the best assisted dying care in the world through our hospice system and our palliative care nursing. And palliative care doctors in particular seem implacably opposed to a change in the law.
Yeah, and I always find it very instructive, very telling that it's the people who are involved in the day-to-day care on the front line of terminally ill people who are most opposed to these plans.
But the campaigners who want to see assisted suicide, I mean, the arguments, of course, that they use are ones of autonomy and also of compassion, aren't they? That it's compassionate to help people kill themselves if they want to.
That's right. Compassion is certainly the argument, but we really need to understand, I think, what at its core what they're saying, and it comes down to the conclusion that some lives are not worth living. And as Christians who believe that all life is given by God, that we're made in God's image, we don't accept that argument that some lives are not worth living. And we would say that the true compassion is to value every life and to seek to help people genuinely who are in this situation where they feel that suicide is their only option. We want to encourage them to look for alternatives, want to support them in their time of need and protect them, the people who are just essentially very vulnerable when they've reached that position.
Yes, we're talking the elderly, infirm, perhaps people with some disability, perhaps people with some mental health issues. These are the kind of people that we're talking about when you talk about the vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So spell out the risks for us for perhaps in particular those kinds of people.
Well, as we say, people who reach the conclusion that all that's left for them is to end their own lives are incredibly vulnerable, and what they need is a law that protects them and says to them, no, you're not able, or we're not able to assist you in what you want to do, and that's what the current law does. Mm-hmm. But if you take that away, then you run the real risk that people in that situation, not only that they will no longer be protected, but there'll be more people put in that situation because the option to take assisted suicide is there. And if someone feels a burden on their family, whether that's an emotional burden or a care burden or a financial burden,
yeah.
then the pressure comes on them, however unintentional that might be. It might be that families don't intend to put that pressure on, but that pressure will exist. And there becomes an expectation, perhaps even in individuals' own minds, that with the option being there, that they should take that option, that it's the right thing for them to do, to relieve the burden on others. And they would perceive themselves to be performing a selfless act at that level.
But for doctors too, I mean, at the moment, someone says to them, that someone that they're caring for says to them, as I'm sure happens, I feel like there's no way out of this. I want you to kill me. The doctor right now can say, I can't.
Yeah.
There's a protection for doctors as well, isn't there, as well as the patient.
Yeah, I mean, we need to understand that assisted suicide, where medics are involved, changes the nature of the patient-doctor relationship, and that's inevitable. And we need to be very wary of that. It's a very, very dangerous situation to be in, and the bill purports to contain, conscience protections and so on, but it's really very dangerous territory to go into, where you are changing the nature of the medical profession in that way. The well-established principle over centuries, millennia even, is that doctors will first do no harm.
Do no harm, yeah.
And that's what we're challenging, really, if we go down this route.
So I want to explore a little bit, before we finish, about the idea of a slippery slope. Essentially the idea that this option, this choice to die, very quickly becomes a burden or a duty or a responsibility to die. And the experience elsewhere has always been, and correct me if I'm wrong, it has always been the case that if you open the door a little bit and you say, well, we're going to do this but go no further, that inevitably, always, that door gets pushed further and further ajar. And when people talk about the slippery slope, that's really what they're talking about. It's a real phenomena. And we should expect the same here, shouldn't we? So can you just take us through perhaps some of what has happened when assisted suicide has been introduced elsewhere? Because we're not talking hypothetically. No. We can see real life experience from other jurisdictions.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's something that in our new briefing on assisted suicide we cover in a little bit more detail. And I would encourage people to look at that for themselves. But as we mentioned, you lose a fundamental principle when you go down the assisted suicide route. You lose the principle that all lives should be protected. And when you lose that, it's inevitable that there will be knock-on consequences. And what we see across the board in all of the countries is a growing number of people who choose assisted suicide. So various jurisdictions, you can point to a 4-fold increase in 10 years. You can point to a 10-fold increase since introduction of people who choose to go down the assisted suicide route.
Where are we talking? We're talking Oregon and Washington states in the US. We're talking Belgium.
Canada, Belgium, Netherlands. Canada's a very instructive example because they only went down the assisted suicide euthanasia route in 2016.
So
relatively recently. And when it was first introduced, it applied only to the terminally ill, and you couldn't get assisted suicide for a mental illness. But it was just a matter of years before that was changed, and it came through pressure in the courts. It was found to be to breach human rights that you had to have a terminal illness to be able to get assisted suicide. So you can see once the principle is gone, you don't quite know where it's going to end up. Belgium, again, when they introduced that was almost 20 years ago now, and initially it couldn't be applied to children. Children couldn't get assisted suicide, but that's changed just in the last 7-8 years. So you can see the safeguards that campaigners claim they're putting in this legislation, that the safeguards are worthless. We inevitably see that they will be eroded, chipped away, or removed altogether.
There's a lot of food for thought there, Dave. Thanks very much for sort of helping us understand this a little bit. Well, we'll be in touch in the coming weeks as we know more about the Meacher Bill in the House of Lords and the bill in Scotland. Thanks for watching.